Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Shop Talk, hosted by the Triangle Area SQL Server Users Group. So tonight we have two people, one of whom is here. Welcome in, Tom Norman.
Hello, Kevin. How are you tonight?
I am well. I am well. Yourself?
Doing well, doing well. First day back from vacation, so it was a little bit of fun.
Fair enough. That's fair enough. This is the busiest time of the year for me. So, this is the one weekend of the year where I actually am fully on call.
Oh yeah, because you guys do a lot of Black Friday, internet shopping, all that kind of fun stuff, huh?
In that
That
area,
your
yeah.
yeah, your
So,
company's quite heavy into making sure all that's working.
yep. And this year, Amazon decided to have some fun, and AWS Kinesis over in East US may or may not have been working.
Uh-oh.
So that was I believe Thursday. It's actually so long ago that I forget which day it was, but I'm pretty sure it was Thursday, Thanksgiving, and
Ah,
affected a lot more than just online shopping. There was a fairly broad swath of the internet that got hit with this outage. Which that's what happens. AWS or Azure goes down in a section. We have pretty serious knock-on ramifications.
that is bad because this weekend every minute is dollars passing by.
Yep. Um, Many in-car connections were affected. I could see that. Yeah. Yeah, we're seeing when Azure had their outage, their Azure Active Directory outage a few weeks ago. That was on a Monday. We spent most of Shop Talk talking about that, and we've seen cases where AWS outages have taken down Netflix, have taken down hundreds of companies, some of which you wouldn't even think about, but so many companies are saying, "Oh, we're going to put some services up here in AWS, up here in Azure." We're getting the full sales pitch for the cloud and how wonderful it is and how everything is 25 nines uptime. So much of AWS, or so how much of AWS was out? Couldn't have been everything, as too many things were still working. Yeah, the answer is I will have to go back and read the after action report. Amazon actually put one out, but it was AWS Kinesis, which is their streaming service. It's their version of Apache Kafka, but in AWS. So if I look,
Well, it's interesting that, you know, it we had the outage, what, about a year and a half ago of Azure DevOps, to
yep,
where basically all of our source code at that time was in the cloud, and it basically shut us down for a day, unless you knew what you were working on, because all of our tickets and, requirements and everything was up there in the cloud, and we couldn't get to them. So it can have pretty serious ramifications. So I kind of heard something the other day at SQL Pass, and the question would be is how many people are actually moving away from the cloud instead of into the cloud? How many people are coming back on-prem or into a colo location that's not Azure or AWS? Because Azure and AWS is nothing really but a colo, depending upon what type of service you want with them.
yeah, so that's a good question. Um, I think the short answer is probably not a huge number, but certainly some. Anders says them's fighting words.
I've actually, the class I heard that on, and I think we were just talking, we were chatting at PASS before some other people got on. I was actually chatting with Kevin Klein, And Kevin Klein, of course, has probably more feet on the ground, and they kind of know what's going on with SQL Century and their monitoring and stuff like that. He says it's a fair percentage because people are basically saying there's no cost savings.
Quite often that's true. Cost savings is usually a function of writing code that is cloud first. You can take advantage of services like, I don't know, maybe Azure Functions. I'm not sure why I might shill for Azure Functions, but AWS Lambda or Azure Functions, you can take advantage of some of the platform as a service offerings, and especially the itinerant stuff. And if you develop specifically for that, using an event based model where everything is asynchronous, you can save a pretty fair amount of money versus hosting all your hardware. As soon as you start talking about, well, now I need to host SQL Server and I need to host a lot of web servers and I have a lot of 24/7 services, that bill gets expensive pretty fast. And by the end of it, you're probably a lot cheaper on premises.
Yeah,
Um,
we've actually we're looking at going to the cloud, moving everything to the cloud the middle of next year. And of course, my boss and my CTO and everything was basically having to justify it to the board to do it. And they have pretty much come back and said no. And a lot of it is, too, we had just, because of COVID and everything, we were able to renegotiate our colo, get a better price and everything. And it's like the thing that those fighting words, Anders, is basically uh, I'm in a shop that does our wonderful entity framework. And guess what the developers are doing? Select star, give me all the data. And that's not a cloud first scenario.
no, no,
That, that's a cloud break the bank scenario.
yeah, pretty much.
It
But
was
that'll suck in
interesting.
any system, Anders says.
Yeah, it's interesting that Century One, for anybody that's on Century One, I did not even realize this, but Kevin Klein told me and gave me actually the stored procedure you can use to pull the data out of Century One to actually go and compare and figure out what the cost would be in Azure.
Hmm.
If anybody wants that information, I've got it. So I thought that was pretty cool to know
Yeah,
that they've got the information already bundled up and ready for you to go look and see what your Azure costs would be.
right. Following up on chat, so Mike mentions I'll always be mixed. Always be mixed. Nothing more than 50% in cloud. And tying into one provider's service costs more when you use all of their services. But he's argued that remaining generic in the cloud and treating it as a commodity is the only way to save. So I um, am sympathetic to that line of thinking, um, because that's going to be probably the easiest way to weather issues like this, where some one of your service providers goes down for a while. How quickly can you move over to another service provider? And the more you tie into specific cloud services, the harder that is. But as far as the bill goes, I would disagree as far as cost exactly, because again, if you develop specifically for cloud services, you develop specifically for Azure Functions, Azure Web Apps, that kind of thing, the migration path from there to AWS Lambda to, say, running Fargate or something else like that to launch containers in AWS, you can get there and you can even write Terraform scripts to try to basically have a layer on top of this. But they are different services, and that's part of where you're going to get some decent price savings.
But the question would be, is if you do that, the question is going to be, is basically how many new startups and everything else that are out there running around, or even existing companies, and they want to get the code out the door as fast as they can. So entity framework, we went, and then nobody can write it properly.
because yeah, identity frame. Yeah, that's true. And when you're in that case, which a lot of companies are, not gonna save anything in the cloud. You're probably gonna pay more in the cloud, and getting to a model where you will benefit from being in the cloud, a lot of effort. So
Yeah, yeah. I basically been telling people, I'm like going, if we went to the cloud, you might as well pull out the platinum credit card because it's going to cost you a bundle because of the Select Star.
yeah, I mean, if you're not willing to make the code changes and architectural changes necessary to make this viable, sure. Yeah,
But
it's always
but when
time
you
versus money.
but when you have an application, an existing application that's been running for 2 or 3, 4, 5 years, making those changes to get to that existing is going to be very costly.
It will be. It will be. It'll be at least costly in time.
So where do you save? You don't.
Eh.
Anders fighting words, dude.
So, let's see. Anders is swearing in church again. There's nothing wrong with entity framework.
Yeah, right.
Ah, I'm gonna lean much more toward Tom than you this on this, Anders. If if we're talking about the viability of ORMs, give me Dapper any day.
I won't say that it doesn't run and do somewhat well, but the thing of it is it's gotten better. I will say over the years it's gotten better, but the thing of it is it's still people don't know how to write anything but a select star. Give me everything back. Lazy load.
Yeah, yeah. There have been improvements for sure. Compare this to the old link to SQL, and
Oh yeah.
so following up, Anders says that our application started in Access and is now running in Azure. Yeah, if there's a good enough ROI or there's a big enough need, you'll get it working. And uh, if you have a dedicated team, if your development team wants to be or needs to be in a cloud, they'll do the work.
I think where our company was kind of bulking at it is financially, really, is from being a CapEx versus a line item
OpEx.
expense. Yeah, they preferred to have the CapEx for whatever
Interesting.
reason. I don't know whether there was a better, I don't know that understand whether there was a better tax return for them. Maybe there's something out there, but if there was, then no one would be going and using the line item expense. So I don't,
Yeah, maybe it is maybe a tax thing where they get to depreciate the capital expenses over several years, and they've been used to that versus operating expenses, which they have to treat differently.
yeah, because it is a switch in your financial services to switch between on-prem and cloud a lot of times.
Right. And uh, I know as well that OpEx is easier to get in large companies than CapEx. Usually for capital expenditures, the larger the company is, the more layers you have to go through before somebody approves it, versus operating expenditures, which are essentially one or two level sign off as opposed to like four, five, six. And that was where Azure and AWS sort of made their claim that, hey, you can get in here with CapEx, or excuse me, you can get in here with OpEx instead of CapEx. So you don't have to go through all those layers of accounting. But you're right, for small to medium companies, yeah, that CapEx versus OpEx argument probably doesn't favor OpEx.
Well, the interesting part too is that hardware has come down significantly. Like I think we bought like a 30 terabyte SAN for like $10,000 a couple of years ago. So, so your hardware is because of the cloud, direct purchase is come down significantly in certain areas.
That's fair. That's fair. Yeah. And hardware quality's gone up considerably at the same time.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, with the exception being that if you want to buy a video card, good luck.
Well, you can pay, NVIDIA, how much ever they want for that, $25,000 video card.
Yeah, the problem is you can't even pay them right now. They're just so out of stock. As soon as there's a batch of new video cards, they're gone instantly.
Oh, wow. Maybe I
It's
should go
been
buy some stock in them, huh?
ah, them and AMD, uh, both of them. This was the case. Actually, we were talking about blockchain before the stream started, and when Bitcoin got hot and people realized that, oh, I can buy 10 different GPUs and link them all together and mine Bitcoin and get $50, um, there was a big run on GPUs. So video cards were scarce. That went away for a couple of years, but it is back. Watched intro? No, no, no. We're talking about it pre-stream where I gave hot takes on how blockchain is garbage. I thought most crypto miners went to field programmable gate arrays. They did. And I think that actually might have been part of why the GPU market cooled off and a normal person could actually buy a video card for some stretch of time. However, today, boom, they're gone. You can't get video cards right now.
Even low end?
Well, I mean, why would I shop in the low end, Tom?
Unless you have to have a video card now. So,
Blockchain isn't garbage, but it's not a panacea. Look, the logical, rational side of me is going to agree with you on this, Mike. However, it's not a hot take if I say that blockchain has some uses but is wildly misunderstood, and any sort of use has to take into consideration the very reasonable issues that come up with it, like the 51% problem. That's not a hot take. That's like a lukewarm take. Hot take is blockchain is garbage. Burn it down now. So, we gotta keep the take spicy. Everyone wants blockchain to store their customer data. Yeah, exactly. This is the misunderstanding that so many people have. That, oh, it's more secure. It's really not. It's a method that has specific uses and can be useful for some things like auditing if you have enough ownership of enough of the compute power that, the bad guys can't take over for just long enough to change all your logs.
so all it will take is basically one data breach that's on a blockchain storage, and that could end the story.
It could, yeah. I mean, every time I think about this, I just go back to Bitcoin markets and things like Mt. Gox, where that essentially ended MongoDB as a data storage system for financial data. In Mongo's case, I don't think anybody on the Mongo team has ever said use Mongo for financial data. If they did, they shouldn't. But I'm pretty sure they would look at it and say, "No, no, this is not for financial data. Don't store your stuff that people could literally go to jail or lose their livelihoods if records drop because it's Mongo." Um, yeah, yeah. Now I'm going off on even wilder takes. This is not faring well tonight.
We
By
went
the end of
really
this,
off of what we're going to talk about.
I'm going to be wearing tinfoil hat. I'm going to be talking about how aliens are among us. and that you can tell because you put on sunglasses and you see them all.
So are you telling me that I should sell my 27-cent blockchain stock that's up 252%? So I've made $30 off of it. So,
So Tom is now rolling in the big money,
yeah,
financial
30
player.
bucks. I'm going to retire with my blockchain 27-cent stock.
Nobody should
Maybe.
mock proper discussion of technology. I
Proper
mildly
discussion.
disagree. I'm okay with mocking anything uh, in the right circumstances. We are engineers. We ask questions and get answers. Yes, if we're talking about andragogical exercise, I'm with you. If we're talking about like this is shop talk. We kick back and we're chatting about stuff. The hot takes can fly. Um, it's a different case. No social media mocking. Yeah, social media is also, speaking of garbage piles. Um, that's a garbage pile.
That's that causes way too much stress and health issues. We need Tracy here, man. That area, you get in there, it can just drive your blood pressure sky high.
Oh yeah. Well, a lot of that's by design too.
Yeah.
It's like Twitter is designed as a hot take factory where you get rewarded for saying stupid things and for the most over the top responses to stupid things people have said. And you get penalized for trying to have context, understanding, or explanation. Anders is on a warning on Facebook. If there is another, there is another wonderful place. Um,
Anders is under warning? No.
I don't. Those of us on Twitter would disagree. I'm on Twitter, and it's a it's not a good place.
It's I do enjoy it for if it wasn't for the SQL world, the SQL help and basically just kind of, following some of the bigger name players and stuff, then I would probably get off Twitter. But I find out stuff a lot faster because of the Tiger team and all that's on SQL, is on there. I found
Yeah,
out seems like I find out faster about it than I do if I was some. But
this. Yeah, you're right.
if it wasn't for this community, then I would say forget Twitter.
Pretty much. Um, I'm pretty much with you there. When I open TweetDeck, I immediately scroll a bit to the right so that I don't see current tweets. Uh, and instead I see SQL help, SQL family, mentions, DMs, stuff that isn't as likely to go down rabbit holes.
Right,
Rabbit holes.
right.
I'm gonna.
Very true.
So speaking of talking to people, check out that segue. Um, Wanted to bring up that Data Platform Summit starts tonight, or it started tonight. I'm not. Time zones are difficult for me. So Data Platform Summit runs through December 8th. It may be too late to get in now, but just in case, the referral code Triangle SQL gets you a real big discount. And I'm going to have a post con on the 7th and 8th, Monday and Tuesday. Um, I'm actually going to show off tonight one of the portions of that post con. So the post con is all about forensic accounting with Python and SQL. And let me we're gonna try to do this. We are going to try sharing screen. That's the screen I want.
I
So,
don't. There it comes. Slowly.
yep, and I better
What in the
switch over to
world?
this before it all dies out. There we go.
Yeah,
Look at
there you go.
this. Look at this. I got it to work.
Oh, he even did it in an Azure notebook. Woohoo!
Yeah, yeah, so that I can rant about how much I strongly prefer proper Jupyter notebooks over what Azure Data Studio has. Because, for example, I could say Shift Enter and it does something rather than that.
Well, when I did my class, the bad thing about Azure Data Studio notebooks was I had images and it wouldn't let me size the images to what I wanted it to be.
That's another problem, yeah.
And it was horrible. It looks horrible, but I'm not
Yep.
going, it's functional. I'm just saying, I just apologize and say it's functional. I apologize. I'm sorry. I could not edit the sizes.
Yeah, a lot of Markdown readers have trouble with sizing images, which is a little strange. Um, because that's been part of the IMG tag for decades, but a lot of Markdown readers just don't like to do that. So nonetheless, this is all about building a safe sequence. So this is SQL specific, and will be SQL Server specific. So let me lay out some context. Suppose that you have a table that is using an identity integer or a sequence. Now, in a lot of cases, you don't care what that number is, just that it's unique. So if I have a customer ID, I have customer ID 1, I have customer ID 4. I may or may not have customer IDs 2 and 3, but that really doesn't matter because all I need is to uniquely identify a customer with a number so that I could pass that around to different applications. Or if I have some other surrogate key where I don't even care what the value is because it has no business meaning. It is just a number that is unique. Identity and sequence work perfectly for those scenarios. They are really good at that. However, there is one scenario where identity and sequence fall apart, and that is when you need when you need continuity. So, as an example, check numbers, invoice numbers. If I have check number 2006 and check number 2008, an accountant is going to go back and ask, where is check number 2007? And if my
And
answer
you're,
is, oh, I don't know, it's not in the database, the accountant's response is, that is not an answer. This is a potential avenue for fraud. Uh, not not writing checks into the books is an avenue for fraud, and that's so old. Accountants know to look for this, so they're going to want to see. I have Here is proof of what happened to check 2007, and even if it's that your kids scribbled on check 2007, they got into the book and just started drawing on it, so you decided to destroy the check. You still want to have proof that you destroyed the check. Otherwise, that check is out there. If somebody cashes it later, that could be money that goes missing. So, if you have an identity column or a sequence, and I'm saying both because both of these apply, you can have gaps that just happen. A couple of reasons why this could happen. Number one, if I roll back. So I have a transaction that inserts into the checks table, and maybe I have a unique constraint violation somewhere else. Maybe I have a invalid input, and on rollback, the ID value is incremented. So actually, let me rephrase that to be more correct. The ID value is incremented before, I remember right, it's before insertion happens. And After a rollback, that increment is not handled in your transaction. Anders brought up the other answer, pre-allocation of identity values on restart, or caching identity values. This is something that was a pretty big performance improvement in later versions of SQL Server, that you have a cache for identity values. You might pull in 1,000 of them into memory, and then the database engine assigns those values as they come in, rather than hitting the internal identity store. That's a lot faster. It's just stored in memory. But on restart, you burn all those cached values. So if you cache 1,000 values and you're at 1,001 right now, you restart the server, you're going to restart at 2,001. And that's expected behavior. The same thing happens with sequences. You can have caching of values in sequences. You draw the next 20, and then as long as you have more sequence values to pull, it goes from there, and then it pulls the next 20. So what ends up happening is that there are gaps in your data that you can find, and that may freak out an accountant. So the question is, how do we prevent that kind of a gap? What is necessary for a safe sequence? And my caveat before we get into this is, what I'm about to show you will absolutely 100% be slower than what you would deal with using an identity value or a sequence. So Mike asks, why not just exception processing that issues a void state for the check that was scribbled on? Or are you describing that exit from the sequence prevents no exception writing? So what I'm describing is, if you have a table, like a checks table, and your check number is an incrementing ID, then on failure to write on a transaction rollback, you've lost that number. And unless you explicitly set identity insert on and try to insert into the table using that number, you're not going to get it back. So you would have to have pretty big permissions to set identity insert on, and then know that this was the ID that was going to be used, and then reinsert that ID. It's a little bit of an edge scenario. There aren't that many normal cases where I would want to do this. A, because it's so slow, and B, because most of the time, if we're using identity or sequence, we expect it to be a surrogate value. This is why you use unique identifiers, so nobody has a clue if there's a gap.
I would agree. There you go, Kevin. Come on.
Can't your organization have a rule that missing numbers are voids? Yeah, until somebody performs an act of fraud and you can't show either way. Like, if these check numbers are actual checks, then how we handle check number 2007, if that's not in your accounting system, that's money that's just potentially has gone missing if somebody cashes the check. You'll catch it, hopefully, in a manual reconciliation later, but your main system may look at that and say, oh, we never had a check 2007. And if you have a nefarious actor, they might be able to take advantage of that, purposefully force check 2007 to fail, and then go do something with the actual physical check. Again, we're getting into kind of the edges of crazy talk here, but if you absolutely 100% need a contiguous set of values that never will have a gap, this is what we're going to do. Of course, any sane financial system would have gotten rid of checks 10 years ago.
Yeah, I was going to say, what's a check?
I still get checks.
Called direct deposit, Kevin. It's faster.
Not when you're consulting.
It's faster.
ID as a service is going to be the next phase. Federated toilet paper release, tripwire for identity. Okay. That's That's a spicy take. I appreciate the take, Enhanced QC. All right, let's get to this prep work. We have a sample invoice table, so it's not just checks. It can also be invoices. It can also be just anything that needs to be contiguous. And so I've got a table that has sample invoice IDs. They are identity integers. I have invoice numbers and invoice details. So notice that I still use an identity column here. That's okay. It's a surrogate key. The thing that I'm showing people is the invoice number, which you can say, hey, shouldn't there be a unique constraint there? Yeah. Also, we have a sequence generator table. So this is where we're going to store the current value of whatever invoice number we need, or whatever sequences we need to generate. So we can have more than one. By the way, this is not a pattern I've come up with. I'm not claiming this is unique. It's not. Okay, so if I have not created sample invoice, then we're going to insert some rows into the sequence generator. Let me run this. I will need to select. I'm probably going to go with that table, that database. And try this. All right, command's successful. We created 4 rows. So here's our generator. This is a stored procedure that makes use of a pattern to generate sequence values. And we're going to ensure that we do not skip numbers or reuse numbers. This will definitely be slower than just using an identity insert. But what I have is a procedure to insert an invoice, given some invoice details. And we're going to check to see if we're in a transaction. Also, we're going to grab from the sequence type table here, the sample invoice sequence type. First thing I want to do, set transaction level to serializable. I am going to lock you down to essentially being single threaded. This will make things slower. I reiterate this because it is that important. This is not how you make things fast. This is how you purposefully make things slow. Next, start a transaction if you're not in one. If you're in a transaction already, we're not going to create a sub-transaction. There's really no benefit to doing that. Having flashbacks to pre-solid identity values in SQL. That's essentially what I'm going back to, yes. So I begin a transaction, and I update the sequence generator using row lock. I just want to lock the one row. I'm going to set it to be in use. So I set a flag. This flag is actually not important. I don't care about the flag, but what it does is I update the row, which means I own that row as long as my transaction is open. Nobody else is going to get in and update that row because I will break the legs of anybody who uses no lock in my database. That's what we're going with here.
That's no fun.
So you will notice there is no lock in here. From sequence generator, we grab the latest number that's in there. My latest number, let's pull that up. Let's get a new query. We're going to connect to Forensic Accounting Python. Sequence generator, our latest number is 0 and currently not in use. So we're going to grab the latest number, like 0. Then, by the way, I'm not expecting this to be an enormous table, so I'm not checking for int overflows. I'm not checking to reset it. In a production system, if you expect to have 2 billion invoices, then you'll have to think about how you reset it. Or you start at int minimum, then you move all the way up. Big int minimum. Then you never have to think about it. Insert in a sample invoice. Here's our invoice number. We take the latest number and increment it. And here's invoice details. Then I'll update the sequence generator, say that it's no longer in use, and commit the transaction. In the event that we have a failure, we're going to roll back that transaction. Rolling back the transaction also releases our lock on the sequence table and does not increment the sequence table. So we hold that lock on the sequence table until we commit or we roll back. And I will generate this stored procedure. How do we use this? Well, here's an example. I'm going to show you the sequence generator. We already saw that. Basically, it's all a bunch of zeros. We're going to insert a sample invoice. We're going to select from the sequence generator again and select from the sample invoice table just to show you that everything went in as you expected. We run this. Started off all zeros. We inserted a new row. So now sample invoice is up to a 1. And if I scroll down a little bit, we have our 1 invoice. Now, what happens if we fail? Well, my maximum string length in the table is only 10. In the stored procedure is 20. That way I can have failure. If I run this puppy, notice that we hit rolling back. So I go off. We're at 1. We had stringer binary data would be truncated. And let's run this again, because my expectation is live test will have a value of 2. If I run this, come through, we started with 1, we now have a 2, and notice that sample invoice ID incremented. The identity column incremented, the safe sequence only jumped up 1. It did not lose the number 2 like identity did. Okay. So that's just to show that, yeah, I can run it on my computer and it works okay for one person, but I kind of wanted to get a feeling for, well, how bad is it going to be performance-wise? And that's where I'm using SQL query stress. Ooh, Anders brings up a good question. So you might be getting ahead of it here, but if you issue 1, 2, and 3, but then something fails down the road with whatever got number 2. So if you got far enough that you inserted into the table, then you already have the number. It's in there. If not, if you're currently inserting number 2, we hold that lock on the sequence generator for that row until number 2 is completely through. So number 3 can't even start until number 2 is completely finished. We are single threading this. We're making it serializable here. And that's in order to prevent something where I have a very long process that may take 12 seconds, 15 seconds to check all of the possible error states and then possibly roll back. But where does it get used after that table? So if you're talking about, say, tracking child tables, stuff along those lines. Yeah, actually, I would say you give the sequence in arrears. Yeah, basically, you could update the header record, the parent record, and say, this thing failed. Here was the failure state. And that way you still have a trail that this attempt failed. But then we try again further down the line, and maybe that succeeds. So that's one way to do it. Or you successfully inserted the record into the invoice table, and I may have a follow-up process to update child tables, and maybe that has to run a couple of times. But I still don't lose the invoice number. And that's the critical thing here. That invoice number, we have a record of it being used. We have an idea of what used it. So we're going to stress test this. SQL query stress was originally developed by Adam Mechanic. It is now maintained by Eric Elskov Jensen. And it is one of my favorite tools for stress testing databases because it is just so easy to use. It's a little thing that Adam put together 15 years ago, and it still works today. So here is SQL query stress. I'm not going to be able to zoom too much on this, but that's okay. We don't need zooming. You need zooming, here's your zooming. We're gonna grab this code and plop it in here. Essentially what I'm doing in this is saying run this 300, or excuse me, run this 200 times, so in a while loop. Every third time we're going to set the value to be something that will fail. Otherwise, we're just going to set it to a valid value. And we'll increment that process. So let's choose a database. We're going to select Forensic Accounting Python. Everything worked. And 2 iterations, 4 threads. So I can go, and it took like less than a second. So if I say 2,000 iterations, 16 threads, watch me take down OBS Studio. It'll take a little bit longer. And you can see the number of exceptions. Like, hey, we've got things failing, which is exactly what I want to see. And while it's going, let's see, it's going to get up to 32,000. So I'm actually just going to cancel it now because we've got enough. I think we got far enough that we're going to be able to check to see, was there an issue? Plus, I got a little crazy with the number of threads thing. I should have kept it down below the number of CPU cores I have available to me. Especially because I am streaming, so it's gonna be a factor. But come down here. What I want to see is gaps. Andrew says, so you're emulating paper accounting. Basically, yeah. So we have gaps. Do we have gaps? Sample invoice. I'm going to check the current sample invoice ID, which is our identity integer, and the next sample invoice ID ordered by sample invoice ID. So I've got the current, I've got the next, and what I'm expecting in an ideal world is that we have just one contiguous string. We already know that's not going to be the case because I already have a gap between 1 and 3. If I run this, we have a gap here, number 2. We may have gaps elsewhere as well, just because we haven't finished running everything yet. So let's... Oh, I see. It's actually everything's failing. Every single call is failing. Well, shucks. That demo didn't go as I wanted it to. Incorrect syntax near go. Oh, I hate myself. All right. Don't use go. SQL query stress. The reason I hate myself is because I did this the last time as well. I did this while I was building the data set. So what we're going to do is that. Future me will be appreciative of that. Okay, so unfortunately, we have to wait until this is finished, but I wonder if I can have 2 instances of SQL query stress running. Oh, look at that. I can. There we go. So while this one is silently failing in the background, this one that doesn't have a go at the end, connect to Python, and we're going to go with 200 iterations of 4 threads. So, by the way, this is a bit slower than... maybe run it with 1 iteration the next time. Well, I did actually run it with 2 iterations, but I didn't think about checking the total exceptions. So that's my excuse. Um, in practice, this is going to actually be faster than what I'm showing because I'm currently throwing crazy exceptions in the other window. But you can still see this is slow. I would not want to deal with this for my extremely high throughput tables where I have hundreds of millions of rows and I'm regularly adding, say, millions of rows a month. This is, however, going to be important for cases where I need guarantees of just how those numbers are set up, that I do have truly contiguous numbers. And those are generally going to be, unless you're Amazon, those are generally going to be fairly small tables. And you may talk about thousands of invoices per year, tens of thousands of invoices per year. And if it takes you 1 second per invoice, by the way, we're doing like a tenth of a second per invoice in this really simple case, then we'll deal with it. How many tables in a system do auditors care about this? Very few. And that's the good news. You know, the good news is, like I said, 99 or so percent of tables that you might work with, an auditor's not going to care what the surrogate keys are. And even in this table, they're not going to care about sample invoice ID, which is good because we can see that there are lots of gaps. What they would care about are these special numbers that have financial meaning and require continuity. So here we're looking at invoice numbers, and I had 4 threads running, 200 iterations of each, so they're running concurrently. And I have no missing values. I'm also going to have no duplicate values. So just a quick little run through. And this is why you create views that hide what is not important to the auditors. Yeah, well, this is also why you don't use surrogate keys as business keys. I mean, that's the other moral of the story. So, oh, good. I was able to close that SQL query stress that went crazy. Again, GUIDs. You know, this is a reasonable situation for a unique identifier, potentially. Something like a customer ID or an account ID, I'm much more liable to say, yes, do make it a unique identifier. Just don't make it the clustered key. Make it the one that shows up on a URL. So instead of having /account/12345, because the curious among us might say, well, what about account 12346? And make it something people won't use in conversation, and make it something people won't be able to twiddle bits on and expect to see a new result. But in cases where you need to have something that is numeric, incrementing, and guaranteed contiguous, this safe sequence will do the job. And now we're gonna stop sharing and come back to the main crowd. So, last thing that I want to talk about tonight, something that came up, what was it, a couple weeks ago, Tom?
Probably.
Sounds about right. You're going on speaking retirement.
I am going on speaking retirement. I might speak, like I told you, maybe some local stuff, but I am now about 3 years and 5 months away from retirement, and I'm going to concentrate on that and get things going and stuff. And we're planning on moving to France, so that's got a lot of got a lot of things to think about, a lot of things to look at, looking at housing, etc. And yeah, Anders, I'm gonna move to Europe, so I'm sure you were probably some comment there, but so I'm not planning on really doing any new presentations. If I need to do any old ones for someone or whatever, course, my hands was always in the encryption, specialty, that type of area, security type of area, because of it's just the data that I deal with and stuff. So, and things, HIPAA data and PI data and stuff like that. So that still has my interest and piques my interest. So,
Yeah,
um, but I've got moving to the starting to move toward my next chapter of life. So
fair. Still gonna. I was gonna use a verb that I probably don't want to use on air. So gonna try to get you to present some later on. But a couple of comments. First, Anders called you a sucker for going to France.
called me a
Um,
sucker, huh? Okay.
what
Tim,
part of
Tim,
France?
Tim, I've got 7 years of French already in my background, so it was kind of it's either France or Italy. So I want to go warm. I don't want to go to your frozen tundra of, up in the Scandinavian countries.
You're talking southern France then.
Yes, definitely southern France. Probably southwest France is what we're looking at.
Anders would take Spain for retirement.
Spain and Portugal definitely is there. I'm just not real keen on Spain, or I'd probably go Portugal before I'd go Spain. But I'd go Italy before I'd go. Probably, the order of right now would be France, then Italy, then Portugal, and then Spain. But the interesting thing is for you guys to think about is that housing over there. I've been looking at some housing, just kind of online, and found a house, 3 bedroom, 2 bath, probably about 2,000, 2,500 square feet on probably, probably about 3,000 square feet of land for like 126,000 euro. That's 150,000. So, I could sell my house here and go pay cash for a house and never pay for another mortgage or whatever. And then you can get into the medical system and stuff like that real easy actually in France. So anyway,
There
for
you go.
those that for those that might be interested in one day of going abroad or whatever, just so people are aware, it's not something just came up because it's political or who's in office or whatever. We've actually been an expat before in England. We lived over in England for 18 months, and I've always been kind of fond of Europe and stuff. I want to travel and stuff like that, so do a lot of traveling, and that's what we plan on doing. Tons and tons and tons of traveling. So
So Mike asked, does the EU just let people move there? It depends on the country.
it
And
does, yeah.
if you're expecting to work there or not.
Yeah, and that is the big difference to really kind of play there if you start thinking about things. Because I'm going over there retired, and basically I am funded and I've got all of my money and all that kind of stuff. And FYI, you still get Social Security and all that kind of stuff. And yes, the book I read, there's still going to be Social Security, even Kevin, for you, or anybody younger. I know you guys laugh, but after reading the book, it totally makes sense, because the voting block for people that are on Social Security and stuff is about 63 million people. So do you think the political people are going to really piss everybody off? Probably not. So
That'll be a discussion for another day. I do want to hit. So TG says, as long as you don't work, you can spend money and stay. Yeah, Andrews is like, you bring the money, countries will just let you move there generally.
yes,
Yeah.
and that's what we're doing, bringing the money and yep, and just going to live.
The last thing I want to hit is Solomon mentioned using app lock instead of custom table for forcing single threadedness. Really, instead of using serializable. Anders did mention that app lock can cause weird issues, and there are locking issues. I've seen self deadlocks based on app lock. I've seen it not scale very well. If you have a lot of concurrent threads, app lock can behave weirdly.
Now,
Also, app
is
lock
AppLock,
only works if your procedures, like if all of your procedures for these inserts are using app lock. And granted, serializable works if all of your procedures are using serializable, but I would mention that it's probably easier to work with saying, I'm going to set this to serializable and force an explicit transaction. That this is the only way you're allowed to, as far as the company goes, this is the only way you're allowed to use this table. Um, that is probably going to be a smoother result for you. And after dealing with app lock problems, the answer is often, well, let's just move to serializable anyhow.
What about you have eventual consistency and microservices and all that kind of stuff. So we have locking, but I don't think they're using app lock. They do it through the code, and basically they lock the record while they're updating the other databases.
Yeah, this is, going back to, this is the um, exceptional case of I absolutely cannot have any gaps. And if you have that scenario and
Right.
you're working with a microservice, then your initial microservice procedure call had better have enough data to at least generate the record, and you can go back and update it later. There's nothing that strictly says all of the data has to be there right now in the first procedure call. It can come in later, but we need to be able to secure this number and make sure that we never lose a number. And we're going to close out EHDR Trooper. We are actually just about to close up Shop Talk for the night. And I will do that with TG's final words of wisdom. The French will still hate you for either not speaking French or for butchering the language when you try.
That is probably true, but we'll see.
Yeah, it's more true in Paris. It's less true as you get away from Paris.
I'm definitely going to be in the countryside, not even close to Paris. I'll probably be at least a 3 or 4 hour train ride to Paris. So,
Yeah, go out to Strasbourg.
yep, Strasbourg will be beautiful.
It's a good place. Been there a couple times. All right, we're gonna wrap up Shop Talk now. Thank you, Tom, for coming in. Tracy was going to be here. She had internet problems that unfortunately kept her down all night. So hopefully we'll see her again next time, and we'll see you next time. Take care, everyone.
Bye bye.